Hi guys, Mrs. Glassy here. I am wanting to just give you kind of an overview of our Read Aloud book, so that way if you missed a bunch of our calls last week, you don't feel like you're totally behind as I continue this story into the next week. So the book I am reading out loud right now is called, the name of this book is Secret. It is written by Pseudonymous Bosch, and I thought that I would just kind of go chapter by chapter and give you just a very brief, quick overview. So our story first starts in chapter 1, where our narrator sort of introduces himself, and one of the reasons that I like this book so much is that in or before the book even starts, you can tell that the narrator is actually kind of an extra character in this story, and he talks a lot to us as the reader, which I think is really neat. But chapter 1 starts with just a bunch of X's on the page, as you can see there in that really crummy screenshot. But that's okay. And then chapter 1.5 is actually called Apologies. And what he kind of describes in chapter 1 is that he doesn't plan to tell you anything actually about the characters because this is such an important and dangerous secret. He doesn't want your lives to be in danger. So chapter 1 and 1.5 are just kind of for fun. But chapter 2 is where we really begin, and same with chapter 3, and that kind of helps us introduce some of our main characters. So in chapter 2, called A Wednesday, we learn about Cassandra and also her grandpa's, and an important element of our story. So Cassandra is probably about a 5th grader, and she is a survivalist. She keeps a backpack on at all times with things that you can see in that photo. And she is always worried about disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, you name it, she's worried about it. And she is living with her mom. She's an only child, and she's only being raised by her mom. And her mom asks these two gentlemen, Grandpa Wayne and Grandpa Larry, who she's known for a really long time. One, I believe, is her old English teacher or science teacher or something. But they basically become her honorary grandparents. So she spends a lot of time with them. And what's really neat for her is that they own a shop of unique or antiques, but they don't sell anything. So this office that they own is an old abandoned fire department, and they have a lot of old antiquity weird things laying around. So this real estate agent named Gloria Fortune she calls herself the real estate agent of the dead, which means that she basically, when people pass away, she takes their belongings and helps get rid of them from the house, and she usually tries to give them to Grandpa Wayne and Grandpa Larry if they seem like really cool stuff. So in this particular chapter, she drops off something for them, and Cass gets really excited about it. It's this old wooden box, and it's called the Symphony of Smells. And when you opened it up, inside there was 99 different glass vials, and every single one had different liquids or even some hair and some feathers and some leaves, and they all had different smells to them. But it was called the Symphony of Smells. And then in chapter 3, we learn about Max Ernest, who's the other main character of our story, and he's kind of an odd duck. His mom and his dad don't get along at all. One wanted to call him Max, one wanted to call him Ernest. And also important to know about his parents is they don't agree on anything. So they live in a house together that's split perfectly down the middle. And so Max Ernest spends part of his time with his mom and part of his time with his dad. And they're in technically the same house, but they're totally different. So he's got a very confusing life, and he's an interesting character as well. But we learn a lot about him too. So then when we get into chapters 4 and 5, chapter 4 is Cassandra. She took the Symphony of Smells to school, which was not good. But when she did that, she was trying to find outside. She was outside and trying to discover, she had this interesting smell in mind, and so she was using the Symphony of Smells. And Max Ernest kind of stumbled on what she was doing, because they weren't technically friends before this, but they've kind of become friends through this Symphony of Smells, I guess you could say. And they found a message hidden inside of the Symphony of Smells. It was a little piece of paper that told them to smell this answer or something along those lines, and it ended up being 4 different smells that spelled out the words help. So now they think that this box of this Symphony of Smells, which came from a magician's house, is totally going to be somebody that they need to go help. So we're also introduced to a character in this chapter. His name is Benjamin Blake, and he is going to be an important member of our story, but they just kind of learn he's a very interesting kid. He paints these things that parents and teachers and adults just think are amazing, but to kids just make absolutely no sense. So he's kind of an odd duck. And then chapter 5 is Cassandra lying to her mom for the first time. So she lies to her mom, and the reason she wants to lie to her mom is her and Max Ernest decide that they need to help this magician where they found this, where the Symphony of Smells came from, and so they devise a plan to work with each other on a science project for school, but really the ruse is that they're actually going to go to the magician's house to try to snoop around and see if they can learn anything. So then when we get to chapter 6, they make it to the magician's house. It's actually a really tiny room when they walk in the front door, which of course was wide open. It's just an elevator. So they have to use the magic word, and then the magic word, which was please, lets them go down to the actual house, which is underground, and everything is wiped. There's nothing inside of the house because it's for sale since the magician has died. But what they notice is that they are looking around, and Max Ernest goes to use the bathroom, and when he goes to the bathroom, he ends up finding a secret room of the house when he flushes the toilet. So in chapter 7, we meet 2 new characters that are very important to our story. Their names are Miss Mauvais and Dr. L. So Miss Mauvais and Dr. L are also touring the house, but Cass and Max Ernest aren't supposed to be there, so they are hiding in this secret hidden room. And while they're poking around, it's just full of magician stuff. And but rather than it being like cool boxes where you can saw somebody in half, it's just like metal and trinkets and really, really odd stuff. But something that Cassandra finds is a notebook, and she decides to take it, and they get spooked and they run away, and Miss Mauvais and Dr. L see the 2 kids. And Cassandra says, it's in that other room. So she's basically trying to like get them to run to that room so that they can run away. Because something that we learned about Dr. L and Miss Mauvais is that they don't really seem to care about buying the house that they're touring. They are instead asking a million questions about the magician that used to own the house. So then in chapters 8 and 9, Cassandra and Max Ernest were able to run away from Miss Mauvais and Dr. L, even though it wasn't all that easy. But they look inside of the magician's notebook, and it doesn't really tell them anything. It's just simply blank pages, and it doesn't have much more information than that. But there's a riddle in it, and they are trying to figure out the riddle, and they solve the riddle, but it didn't help them get into the magician's notebook. But something else important about chapter 8 is that we learn that Cassandra's mom is going to go out of town, and she's going to go on vacation. Now, normally, Cassandra would be sad that her mom was going on vacation, but this actually gave her an opportunity to be able to continue to try to investigate what's going on with this magician. So in chapter 9, what we learn about Cassandra is that she is going to be staying with her grandparents for the time that her mom is out of town. And with her grandparents, Grandpa Wayne and Grandpa Larry, they kind of let her do whatever she wants. So they are so interested in finding unique stuff for their shop that is funny because they don't ever sell anything. They end up being gone a lot of the times. So Cassandra's grandparents have this seeing nose dog. He's blind, but he can smell really well, so they call him a seeing nose dog. But she takes him to go talk to Max Ernest, and unfortunately Max Ernest isn't able to go investigate with her for that day. But when she gets back to her grandparents' shop, she realizes that somebody has stolen the Symphony of Smells, but she doesn't know who it is. So that's a bummer. When we get to chapter 10 and chapter 11, unfortunately in chapter 10, her grandparents accuse her of stealing it. So even though she didn't steal it, they accuse her of stealing it, but she can't say that she didn't because that would get her into a little bit of trouble as well. So in chapter 11, you can see in that picture that the magician's notebook has been all blank, but Cassandra finally figures out what's going on. She took all the pages out of the rings and she flipped them around and looked underneath them, and the magician's story is underneath. So she runs to school to go find Max Ernest to tell her what she discovered, and she bumps into Benjamin Blake, who seems really confused. But what's most important in this chapter is Miss Mauvais and Dr. L are roaming around the school talking to the principal. So Cassandra is definitely a little freaked out about that. And then in chapters 12, and then it should be 13, but they crossed out 13 and they wrote 14 for superstition's sake. We hear the story that was inside of that magician's notebook. So the magician that wrote this story, his name was Pietro Bergamo, and he is telling the story of he and his brother who came over here from Italy as immigrants to try to flee that country. And they were supposed to find a cousin or an aunt of some kind, and they never showed up. So the kids instead joined the circus, because something really cool about Pietro and his brother, he calls Luciano, is that they have something called synesthesia. And what that is if you tell them the number 2, they see the color blue. So it's kind of a mixture of the senses. So that helps them be really good in the circus, because they can, try to guess somebody's birthday and things like that, just based on this extra sense that they have, that they can mix together the senses. So what we are learning about in this story is about Pietro and his brother Luciano, but eventually this woman, who he describes as being as cold as ice, basically, and basically takes away his brother Luciano, and Pietro is left by himself, and Pietro basically spent the rest of his life sad and alone, looking for his brother this entire time. And what the story is kind of leading into is the fact that the story just kind of ends. Pietro's story, you could tell the rest of the pages had been ripped out of the notebook, like they were worried about all the pages being found, and so they only took some of them behind. So that's about where we are in our story, and we will take off on Monday or possibly Tuesday with continuing the story with chapter 15, but that's kind of an overview of where we are so far.